Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I grew up in a small western Massachusetts town below the Berkshires. It was July 4, 2017. I worked in a cafe in town and had to work during the holiday. My shift ended around 5 o'clock and I had plans to go to the Bellevue Cemetery with friends for some peace and quiet. I was tired of all the noise from the day and wasn't interested in fireworks that night. I met up with everyone outside my house and we picked up some fast food before leaving. There were about 5 of us and we all started walking down to the cemetery, eating and chatting as we made our way to the cemetery. The cemetery wasn't huge, but it was big enough that we could find a quiet place to sit and hang out for a bit. After we got there, we were all settled under a tree. I relaxed and just listened while everyone else was talking. I was still reeling from work and how busy the day was for me. That's when I noticed something moving in the distance behind a few mausoleums. It was dark and I could only make out a shadow. I couldn't tell what I was looking at and figured an animal had come down from the mountain and wandered into town after smelling all the barbecuing. Then I saw whatever it was sprint from behind one mausoleum to the next. It was way too big to be a wolf or a mountain lion, but too fast to be anything large like a bear. It startled me for a minute. I couldn't imagine any animal I could think of being out in the light of day like this. It made me nervous. My friends noticed a change in the look on my face and asked me what was wrong. I didn't want to say I saw a big scary shadow running around the cemetery. I thought they'd make fun of me, so I just shrugged it off and said it was nothing. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. Right then I saw the figure again. It sprinted back further into the cemetery, this time behind gravestones and then behind a tree. My curiosity got the best of me at this point and I played it off like I needed to walk. I headed off in the direction of the shadow when I saw it take off again. I noticed it had an unbelievably large head. I couldn't tell how tall it was, but I knew it was bigger than any of us, and the quick glance that I got at it reminded me of a man completely covered in hair. I just thought that my mind was playing tricks on me, but I was still curious. I approached the mausoleum that it had been hiding behind. I looked down to be sure not to trip and froze. There in the dirt was an enormous footprint the size of my forearm and complete with claws right there in the soil. I started to panic, a little puzzled by something I didn't yet understand. I had never heard of a creature with a footprint so big in my whole life. I proceeded with caution towards the tree that it had ducked behind. I just needed to know if I was crazy or if we were actually in danger. I got to the tree and found nothing behind it. No one was crouching or hiding from us. That's when a cluster of leaves fell from the tree above and hit me on their way down. I heard a loud rustling too. There was no breeze. I slowly lifted my head to look up. There, glaring down at me, was a hideous dog creature with eyes shaped like a human but amber-colored and terrifyingly piercing. This dog creature was as long as the branch it was laying on as it slowly growled at me. I ran back to my friends and told them we had to go immediately. They protested at first, but then one of them caught a glimpse of the creature jumping down from the tree. She didn't get a good look at it, only a shadow, and all she could tell was that it was huge. We all grabbed our things and made our way out of the cemetery. The friend that had seen the shadow asked me what it was. I played it off saying I didn't see the shadow, only signs of a coyote circling around, and felt scared. I didn't describe the dog creature or acknowledge it. I no longer live in the area and haven't heard of any encounters with the dog creature since my encounter. Maybe it went into the mountains and stayed there.
I decided to rent a cabin way up in northern Michigan for a week with my sister Tanya. My sister is a writer and this was also what she needed because she hadn't written in 2 weeks. So off we went. It was late May and still quite chilly, but we didn't care about the weather because we weren't there sunbathing on the beach. The cottage was rustic but recently redone, and it was located on a small pond but was surrounded by thick woods. Our cottage was the last one down a long dirt road. The cottage owner had put in several really nice long trails because if not, then nobody was enjoying the woods. The first day we were unloading our luggage from the car and a young guy and his mom walked up the driveway. They introduced themselves and said they owned the house a little way down the road and they went for walks a few times a week for exercise past the cottage. The mother, Linda, mentioned that her husband had passed away a few years earlier. And of course, I told her that I lost my husband Josh a few months earlier as well. Linda looked so sad for me, but her son Brendan had a smirk on his face which really creeped me out. Linda seemed to notice this as well and said,
"Okay, let's leave these ladies to unpack,"
and then said their goodbyes. I was unnerved by the way Brendan looked at me and I noticed he kept looking back at me as they walked away. On the first day, we just hung around the cabin. The next day I went for a walk alone so Tanya could get some writing done. I chose the path the owner said was the easiest. I had been walking for 10 minutes when I heard the sound of a small animal moving through the underbrush, maybe something the size of a rabbit. So I stopped to listen, and when I stopped, the rustling stopped. I happened to glance back and I saw the shape of a human standing behind the thicket. I thought it was Brendan, so I turned and kept walking. I was almost halfway and I'd see a tree about 30 feet in front of me, but completely surrounded by the same thicket. I saw what again I perceived to be a naked Brendan. I couldn't see clearly because he was shrouded in darkness, but I saw him perched on the bottom limb of a tree, just crouched there staring at me. I could see one hand holding the limb he was crouched on and his other arm was wrapped around the tree trunk. But now that I look back and I know what I was looking at, I can't believe I thought it was Brendan. A day or two later, I was finally able to pull Tanya away from her laptop, and we were on the porch to watch the sunset. We distinctly heard a wolf howl from at least the other side of the pond. We agreed it was really close, but we weren't too worried. We were more worried about the mother bears, as we were told by Linda and the cabin owner that we needed to keep the bear spray on us at all times because the cubs were very young and the mothers were really protective. About 10 minutes later, we heard an animal screaming. "Oh my gosh!" we were both saying and covering our ears. Tanya was saying this is too close to nature for me. Then Tanya went in to use the bathroom, and when she came back she said, "What is that?" and pointed to the wood line. I saw the shrubs shaking, then an animal came out of the woods with a baby deer hanging from its mouth. The baby wasn't just a newborn. We looked at pictures showing various ages and it was probably approximately 2 weeks old. We are not country girls, so please don't get on me for being wrong. Anyway, Tanya said, "No, I don't want to see this," and she went inside. I sat looking at this animal. I was fairly certain the fawn was already dead, or I would have done something. At least I'd like to think I would have. What? I don't know. But regardless, I was trying to figure out what this animal was. It was walking into the open from the woods. It dropped the fawn from its mouth, then it started sniffing it. I was fairly certain that this was a very large wolf with a case of the mange, because its hair was thick around the neck like a lion's mane and it was thin to bare in spots. Its rear end was bald and I didn't even see a tail. I noticed it looked almost deformed because the back end sat way lower than the front. The animal seemed almost mesmerized by the fawn. It stared and sniffed at it, then it pushed it forward or over by using its nose. Then it picked it up by the mouth and started shaking it side to side viciously. Then it started biting into the midsection, and when it lifted its head to chew, you could clearly see intestines hanging out of its mouth. Now I believe I let out a sound at that point because it looked at me surprised and then ran about 10 feet to the large tree. It turned around and literally stood on its back legs. Oh my gosh. I realized this was the thing I saw up in the tree. I could clearly see the eyes were rusty colored and they were illuminated. They were glowing from the inside. It was starting to turn dusk. It just continued to stand there behind that tree. It seemed to be apprehensive a little, but it was staring at me, and then it would look towards the fawn. At one point I thought I saw it lift its lip and the whole muzzle started to vibrate like it was trying not to bare its teeth. Finally, it got down on all 4 feet and started walking slowly to the fawn. When it was almost there, it swung its head in my direction and let out a low, menacing growl. At the same time, it bared its teeth. This animal was at least 400 pounds. It could be even bigger, but I'm afraid that the naysayers will call me a liar. This animal was at least 3 to 4 times as big as my German Shepherd. All the way around its head was huge. But what really terrified me was when it sneered at me and went down for the fawn. Its teeth were at least 3 inches long, sharp, and jagged. When it got to the fawn, it picked it up in its mouth and took off at a fast slope. We didn't leave for walks after that. We barely left the cabin. When we did leave the last day, we drove over to that tree and I got out and stood beside where it stood, and I can say without a doubt it was well over 6.5 to 7.5 feet tall. We drove past Linda's house, and on second thought I asked Tanya to turn back around. I wanted to tell them what we saw. Linda was genuinely concerned and seemed shocked to hear what we saw. She appreciated that we thought enough to stop. When we got home, we called the landlord and he said straight away that we were warned to carry bear spray, so I just left it at that. I figured he thought we wanted our money back, and that wasn't the case. So that's our story. I'm pretty sure it wasn't a Bigfoot.
I tucked this away and never told anybody before. We live in Southern California east of Los Angeles, and this incident occurred in 1996. My wife and I were leaving home early this particular morning. It was still dark. As we were trying to get on the major highway near our home when we hit something coming out of a residential construction area. It ran extremely fast in front of the car. I had no time to stop, so I hit this thing. I came to a stop as soon as possible. I told my wife I was going to get out and take a look at what I hit. She begged me not to get out. I was sure that I had hit a dog. I stepped out, and as I rounded the car, the headlights of my car shone upon something that I'd never seen before. It was disturbing. I backed up a little bit and I realized what I had hit wasn't a dog. I have owned and trained large dogs for most of my life, but nothing compared to the size of this thing. Nothing about it resembled what I would say was a domesticated canine. Everything about this was wild and bulky. It had what looked like a lion's mane. It had teeth that looked like it came out of a Hollywood horror movie. I can't even begin to describe the fright I had in seeing this thing. I backed up a bit more. I could see its teeth were unusually big and sharp, and there was a pool of blood forming underneath its mouth. Its eyes were open, but yet it wasn't moving. I could still see the bright amber eye color. My wife stepped out of the car and asked what it was. I said I don't know. We got in. I backed up and drove around it. I said if it's still there when we get back home we'll take a closer look. Later that day, when we got back, it was gone. A dried pool of blood was the only evidence that remained. To this day we kept quiet about the incident. So, 26 years later, now felt compelled to come forward. Not because I feel guilty about the experience, but because I had another unexplained sighting. We live in the same home as we did when the previous incident occurred. One evening, I was a few blocks away from my house going through a house that I was getting ready to sell. I am a realtor and own a real estate business. When I was finished, I exited the front door of the house, walked to my car that was parked in the driveway, and got in. As I backed up into the street, I observed a large upright beast cross behind me. I immediately stopped and looked out the passenger window. This creature was running on two legs in between the house and the neighbor's property. I sat in the car dumbfounded by what I had just witnessed. Then I had a flashback to the incident in 1996. I quickly realized that this was either the same creature or something very similar. That was the last time I saw this creature. But now I realize that there is an unknown upright, canine-like beast living in the area. Thinking back to the latest encounter, I estimate that it easily stood 8 feet in height and it had a very human-like gait when it was running.
I had my encounter last summer while on break at work during a slow part of the night. I live and work in Mitchell County in western North Carolina. This is a county that you have written about since you have family here and you are aware of the varied wildlife. I would take the short drive to a park near my workplace that has a lot of wildlife. I like to watch the occasional raccoon or fox breaking the wood line. The park backs up to a rather large creek. The area is devoid of artificial light as the darkness of the woods does not spook me or make me jumpy. I was raised in the mountains and I enjoy the solitude. On this night, there were no normal night sounds, such as crickets or frogs. I also found it strange that all the wildlife seemed to be gone from the area. This bothered me a bit. I decided to leave some dog food at the edge of the woodline, hoping to entice a particular family of raccoons out so I could at least see that they were okay. I didn't see a gray fox that would hang around the area. This fox would come within a few feet from me, meander around, and then retreat back into the woods. After walking near the woods with the food, I heard a deep growl come from inside the edge of the wood line. I had never heard an animal growl with such intensity and so deeply. I could literally feel the vibration of the growl hitting my face and inside of my chest. I knew that it wasn't a bear, whose sounds I was familiar with. I dumped the food on the ground with one hard drop, hoping that whatever was in the wood line would take off. I backed away with my head down until I reached my truck. My instinct told me to drive away, so I did. I decided to go back about an hour later. I was now curious as to what this creature was. I parked in the same place and this time walked to the back of my truck to grab a smoke. While standing there, I observed a dark mass come across the road and disappear into an overgrown open field with wild blackberry bushes and grass. I do have a sharp eye and I was able to discern some detail. I can only describe this creature as some kind of hybrid canine. It was on all fours, but it did not appear natural. It moved very quickly with fluent motions. The gait was weird as well, like the front legs were pulling its body forward. It almost had a human-like movement to it, as if it could stand on 2 legs if needed. The long back was hunched. The snout was long, but it fit its body. What struck me most were its ears, which were large and folded back. The legs also had muscle mass to them. My background working with dogs told me that this was something very unusual. I just know that it was there 1 minute and gone the next. When daylight came, I drove back to the location. I looked for tracks but listened to my gut and did not enter. For several months I didn't tell anyone about it. I started searching the internet for what I had seen. I wondered if it was some type of hybrid that had escaped. I found several online sites but none seemed to come close to what I had seen. Then I came across the picture of a dogman. If you take what I saw and stand it upright instead of being on all fours, that's what I saw without a doubt. It wasn't overly massive, possibly a juvenile. I later spoke with a few of my co-workers. Of course, they told me it was a bear or a large domestic dog, but a few of them did acknowledge that the wildlife in the area had been disappearing for a while. I don't speak about it much because of ridicule, but I do know what I saw, heard, and how my instincts reacted to it.
My daughter and I were driving home in rural Michigan Upper Peninsula during the summer of 2018. We were almost home when we saw this strange black being that was running faster than any animal I've ever seen. At first she said,
What is that? It looks like a werewolf.
Then I paused and said, that may be a dogman. It ran on all fours and had a long body that was very muscular. The face looked like that of a wolf in a way, but also something about it looked human. It's hard to put in words. I kept my eyes on it the whole time. Its body seemed to be running in, like glitches. It ran so fast, but it was also looking in our direction. My daughter was so freaked out by it. I was just kind of amazed and kept saying that it was either a werewolf or a dogman. I could see its teeth for a second, which were that of a wolf. But the face was half human and animal. It ran so amazingly fast, faster than any animal I've ever seen. The darkness of its color was also kind of strange because it was so deep black. Once it was past us, it disappeared. I never took my eyes off it once. It just vanished. This is hard to put into words what we saw and how it happened, but I'm telling you, it's the truth. I'm 61 years old and my daughter is 41 years old. I'm not telling this for entertainment. I'm telling it because it's the truth. It wasn't the size of a dog because of the strange length of its body being so long compared to a normal dog. The face was bizarre, being half human and half wolf. I go by this area daily, and often when I'm with my daughter I ask her if she believes what we saw. She doesn't like to even talk about it amongst just ourselves because she is still so freaked out about it, and there is no one who can actually say for certain, yes, that is what you saw. My first thought was werewolf, but I've read stories of others in Michigan who have had these strange experiences with what is called a dogman, so I'll never know 100% what I saw. All I know is that it was something very strange and not normal. The reason I didn't have that fear probably was because I was in a car. It was still very light out and it ran across the road in front of us. Although I do have to say, later on, I thought I hoped it didn't follow us home. I think about this experience almost daily. The way it ran was so bizarre. It happened so fast, though I wish I could have captured a picture. My daughter is so spooked out about it that she still gets shaken talking about it. I believe there are lots of things out there that we just don't know about yet.
I was working at a very big factory in Stuttgart, Arkansas, in pretty much the east central part of the state. One night, I got off of work at around 8 p.m. I went to one of my coworkers' houses and proceeded to indulge in plenty of beer. But it was well after midnight when I left his house to make the half-hour drive to my house. Don't drink and drive, kids. But I was on the main highway that connects Stuttgart to England and was cruising around 65 miles per hour and really had no oncoming traffic, as everyone is either heading the same way as me or has already turned off elsewhere. I had a car that had a light bar installed on the front bumper. I had my light bar on and it really shined up the road in a good way. I went around a curve and noticed something dark off to the passenger side of the road in a ditch next to a rice field, walking the same way as I was heading. As I got closer to the object, I could tell it was covered in black fur and was walking on 2 feet. As I got close enough to see the complete look of the creature, it turned and looked at me. It felt like it peered into my soul. I could tell it had a wolf-like head with a muscular build body. I don't know if it was the alcohol I drank that made me see it or what, but I didn't stop. I know I probably wasn't seeing stuff because the car that was behind me slammed its brakes and backed up to get an angle of the field with their headlights. I kept driving and drove the rest of the way home, doing over 100+ miles per hour. I made it home, to which I promptly ran in the house and slept with my gun in my lap with me. That night I kept hearing things walk around the outside of my house, and my bulldog would cower in his kennel and would not get out of it. I have not drunk more than 3 beers in a single sitting since.
I would like to share what happened to me in mid-April 2015. It was the end of the afternoon and the light was good. I had decided to take a little walk in the Jura Mountains forest, eastern France, where I live, with a friend and my little dog. We chose a place where I parked my car and we began to walk in. It didn't take long before I began to feel nervous. As we were walking, we heard a horrible noise. It sounded like doves, but they were not singing, but they were screaming. It was the first time I have heard this noise. I laughed and said to my friend, "I feel like they don't want us in the forest for some reason." We pushed on and the path was wide as we got further along. Suddenly, I noticed something moving down the track to the side of us. I realized it was an animal and I thought it was a large dog. The color was very black. I was upset and I told my friend I'd rather go back to the car. I didn't want my little dog to cross what I thought was a big dog off the leash. Luckily, I had my little dog on a leash. I started to turn around and return to the car, but my friend stayed and watched to see if she could place the rogue dog without an owner. I was walking for a few minutes when I heard my friend screaming, "Run! Run!" Without looking back, I accelerated my pace and arrived at the car out of breath. I put my little dog into the car. Before I got in the car, I looked down the path and I saw a deep black-colored creature walking into the forest away from us. I was so surprised and shocked, I couldn't believe it. I could only see the top up to the shoulders of the creature. My friend who joined me at the car explained to me what she saw. She said that this creature moved by a slipping at high speed along the side, then seemed to get its momentum and straightened up onto its hind legs. My friend told me, and this is what I can confirm, that she was over 2 meters tall. We couldn't see its eyes. The creature stopped when it saw my friend. They looked at each other for a few seconds, then the creature decided to turn into the wood. My friend told me it had a dog's head, and the ears were pinned down. This creature had a muscular body, torso and thighs, that was covered with deep black hair. We were shocked. We later decided to go back to the forest and see if there was an explanation to all this, but didn't notice anything strange that we would answer this puzzle. And then I told my friend we should try to get back to this place before nightfall. So, we did this 2 weeks later. It's strange, you see, because, when we got out of the car on the evening visit, we immediately felt something was wrong. The atmosphere was very different. There was complete silence. We began to walk and after a few minutes, I felt anxious again. I decided to go back and my friend tried to push on into the trees, but she also came back running. The creature was there again. It was standing in the woods, looking at us. Thankfully, I had not seen the creature this time. We would like to be courageous enough to take a picture of the creature. I know that we are not the only ones to have seen this dogman, and we are sure that it is what we saw. We learned that someone else saw it as well a few days later. So I tell some friends to be careful if they decide to go into any forest, especially if this forest is abnormally silent. As I do with everyone who comes forward, I asked if they had ever experienced anything else unusual or unexplained either in this area or at another point in time. This is not the first time I have had a strange meeting in the forest. The first dates back to 5 or 6 years previously in August. I never heard of the name Dogman until a year ago. I must tell you that I have always loved nature, fields and forests since my childhood. I always went to the woods a lot. But that year, while I was going to fetch mushrooms, I felt uncomfortable without understanding why. Several times, I went back to the car. I regained my senses, then found myself confused, and then I understood what was bothering me. It was the abnormal total silence in the middle of summer. One morning, I arrived early and got on a trail. I saw a black mass at the end and I thought it was a tree stump. I continued to search for my mushrooms and gradually moved closer to the tree stump. When I looked up, my heart started thumping so hard I felt like I could hear it outside my chest. I did not understand what I had in front of me, what I was seeing with my own eyes. Imagine a human being squatting, with their head on their chest sleeping. But it was not a human being. It was covered with black hairs everywhere. It was not a boar. It was not a badger. I did not understand what it was, and especially as I had never felt such a feeling of panic in my life. I started backing up, praying that this creature would not wake up, and I ran away without turning around. I have never been able to return to the forest after I made the observation of the creature I saw and told you about. In the meantime, I had learned the Dogman story, that people were seeing them and that they could be dangerous. In April, I was with my friend. My friend is a medium and can see and experience the dead. So, I think that there is a connection. Since I have known her, I'm starting to see some weird things on my lot in front of my house with my camera at night. My little dog is also seeing and reacting to things I do not see with the naked eye. When he growls, if I take a picture in the dark, there are orbs, colored tubes, shapes that move. As far as the Dogman is concerned, it's a very real creature. This story disturbs me. I really want to know, but I'm scared to go back. Yet at no time did it show any aggression. It could have arrived on us without problem. It was moving fast with long strides. I know that I will return to this forest despite my fear, but I will not go alone. My friend went back to her home in the north of France. When she was face to face with this creature, a small inner voice pushed her to go with it, but her survival instinct took over. My friend told me she remembered a past life experience. She was hunted in the forest by humans. She had 2 wolves that accompanied her, a white one and a black one that protected her. When she was captured as a witch, the people killed the wolf in front of her cruelly.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.